Hello, Chosen One. The darkness has been pressing hard this week because it sees what you can't see yet, the door that's about to open. You have been feeling an unprecedented, almost suffocating level of spiritual and psychological pressure lately. It feels as though the very atmosphere around you has thickened, creating a profound, unexplainable exhaustion that settles deep within your bones, leaving you drained before the day even begins. You have undoubtedly noticed the bizarre, frantic escalation in the behavior of the people around you, the sudden, unprovoked hostility, the passive-aggressive jabs, the frantic scrambling of individuals who used to pretend they were entirely unbothered by your existence. You have been looking at your current circumstances, analyzing the sudden friction, and wondering if you have taken a wrong turn, if you are being punished, or if the universe has simply decided to place an immovable roadblock on your path. But you need to understand something of absolute, paramount importance right now, in this very moment. The enemy is not attacking you because you have failed. The enemy is frantically, desperately attacking you because of what is coming. This intense pressure, this overwhelming sense of being squeezed from all sides, today, right now, this week, is the ultimate, undeniable proof of your imminent promotion. The darkness does not waste its limited resources on a threat that has already been neutralized or a spirit that has surrendered. It only rallies its forces, sending every distraction and toxic individual it can find, when a massive, paradigm-shifting breakthrough is on the verge of manifesting in the physical realm. The spiritual realm operates on a frequency that anticipates change long before it arrives, and the chaotic pushback you are experiencing is simply the violent friction of your old reality breaking apart to make room for your new, breathtaking altitude. I am speaking directly into your situation to declare that this specific struggle is ending within the next 24 hours, and for many of you, the energetic shift will occur by the time we reach the end of this very message. It is ending entirely because of the deep, unseen, grueling internal work you have done in the dark, where no one was clapping for you. You did the shadow work, you healed the wounds, and now the harvest is absolutely mandatory. I'm Brian. For decades I've been writing spiritual content and helping people to achieve real awakening, to decode the intricate matrix of human behavior, and to navigate the treacherous, deeply isolating waters of a genuine divine calling. The premise of our gathering today is severe, but it is an absolute necessity for your continued ascension. The people currently exposing themselves in your life, the ones melting down, acting completely out of character, and desperately trying to provoke a reaction out of you, are doing so because a very specific, carefully constructed dynamic has been permanently shattered. For years, you hid your absolute, terrifying genius behind a carefully orchestrated act of simplicity. You played the fool to survive the fragility of their egos. But recently, you stopped playing the game. You dropped the dumb act, and you played the final card, leaving them stranded in a reality they do not know how to navigate. Before we break down the exhaustive psychological and spiritual architecture of exactly how you did this and why they are panicking, I need you to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button to align your energy with this frequency, drop a comment with what point hit you hardest, and share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear this truth today. Step 1. Dismantle the pedestal you built for their manufactured authority. There is a profound, fundamental difference between the quiet, observant stillness of a spiritually aligned mind and the loud, chaotic desperation of someone who must constantly prove their dominance to a room. For the longest time, you recognized, with the hyper-vigilant radar of a true chosen one, that your natural frequency, your razor-sharp intellect, your deep intuition, your rapid ability to connect the dots and see entirely through the flimsy facades of others, was highly intimidating to the fragile architectures of the egos surrounding you. You realized, perhaps subconsciously at first, that whenever you spoke your absolute truth, whenever you demonstrated the full, unbridled capacity of your brilliance, it triggered a microscopic, violent panic in the people who desperately needed to feel superior to you. And so, out of a misguided sense of profound empathy, or perhaps as a sheer, calculated survival mechanism in a highly toxic environment, you engaged in the most exhausting performance of your life. You intentionally dimmed your own light. You constructed a brilliant, impenetrable camouflage of the unassuming. You played the dumb act. You let them over-explain basic concepts to you that you had already mastered a decade prior. You allowed them to win petty arguments that were fundamentally flawed in their basic logic. You nodded along to their shallow, rehearsed monologues, burying your staggering genius beneath a thick, suffocating layer of intentional compliance. To understand the emotional mechanics of this choice is to understand the absolute, bone-deep exhaustion of the chosen one. It takes a staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of intelligence to successfully play the fool. It requires you to constantly, actively edit your vocabulary, to forcefully suppress your intuitive flashes of insight, and to swallow the burning, visceral desire to correct a narrative you know is built entirely on lies and deep-seated insecurity. You became a master of the blank stare, the agreeable nod, the self-deprecating joke designed specifically to disarm their paranoia. You essentially placed a heavy, suffocating blanket over a blazing lighthouse just so the highly insecure moths fluttering around you would not burn themselves on the searing heat of your truth. You did this because you thought it would bring peace. You thought that if you made yourself smaller, more palatable, less threatening, they would finally accept you. The constant friction would cease, and you could simply exist. But the spiritual drain of this constant, relentless self-erasure is monumental. You were carrying not only the heavy, golden weight of your own profound calling, but also the dead, parasitic weight of their unearned superiority complexes. Every time you pretended not to notice a subtle insult, every time you acted clumsy to make them feel graceful, every time you asked a question you already knew the answer to just to give them a fleeting moment to feel intelligent, you were slowly chipping away at your own vital spiritual energy. You must look at the glaring contrast between your authentic alignment and their frantic, performative facade. You do not require external applause to validate your internal reality. Your internal architecture is built on the solid bedrock of divine connection. You know exactly who you are in the dark when the audience has gone home. The imitator, however, is an empty, echoing vessel. They possess no self-generating source of light, and therefore they must construct a rigid, artificial hierarchy where they are positioned at the absolute top, dictating the narrative to everyone they deem beneath them. Your dumb act was the ultimate psychological subsidization of their fragile identity. The deep psychology of their current panic is rooted entirely in their profound fear of your actual light. They relied on a highly specific script, a script where they were the wise, experienced master and you were the naive, clumsy novice. The moment you stopped following that script, you didn't just hurt their feelings, you fundamentally obliterated their entire sense of self. They are melting down because they realize that their perceived dominance was entirely an illusion that you graciously permitted them to experience. You dismantled the pedestal and they fell flat on their faces. Think of this dynamic as trying to hide a massive, radiating supernova inside a cheap cardboard matchbox. You spent years meticulously folding your vast, multidimensional energy into a tiny, non-threatening package. You contorted your spirit, holding your breath so that the fragile structure of their reality wouldn't combust. But the absolute goofy nature of their arrogance is that they actually believed they had built the matchbox strong enough to contain the star. They looked at the tiny cardboard box and thought they had tamed the universe. They possessed absolutely no comprehension of the fact that the only reason the box hadn't instantly vaporized was because the star was voluntarily holding back its heat. The sheer comical absurdity of a toxic imitator trying to compete with a divine calling is always rooted in this delusion. They genuinely believed that your silence was an absence of thought, completely failing to grasp that your silence was actually the heavy, pressurized atmosphere of a genius mind observing their every move. The camouflage was never a sign of your weakness. It was a testament to your terrifying, unparalleled self-control. Step 2. Observe the parasitic reliance on your strategic smallness. While you viewed this exhausting performance as a temporary accommodation to keep the peace, a way to survive the daily psychological warfare without constantly drawing your sword, they viewed it as the permanent, unshakable foundation of their entire identity. You must deeply analyze the terrifying psychology of the imitator, the narcissist, and the highly performative individual to understand why they are currently unraveling. Their internal landscape is not just empty. It is a hostile, barren wasteland of deep-seated insecurity, chronic shame, and self-loathing. To survive the agonizing reality of their internal void, they must construct an elaborate, external theater. In this theater, they are the star, the director, and the smartest person in the room. But a star cannot shine without a dark background. A master cannot exist without a student. A superior intellect cannot be validated without a supposedly inferior mind to constantly correct and belittle. You, in your carefully crafted act of artificial inferiority, became the absolute cornerstone of their psychological survival. They became profoundly, chemically addicted to the version of you that did not threaten them. They fed on your supposed clumsiness, your forced naivety, and your gentle, accommodating deference like a starving parasite feeding on a healthy host. They were completely, delusionally convinced that they were the ones steering the ship, simply because you were allowing them to hold the toy steering wheel while you quietly managed the actual engine room. This addiction is not merely a poetic metaphor. It is a literal, neurological dependency. Every time they gave you unsolicited, condescending advice, and you graciously accepted it to spare their fragile feelings, their brain received a massive spike of dopamine. When they subtly mocked your dreams, your boundaries, or your ideas, and you merely smiled and looked away, they felt an intoxicating, highly addictive rush of dominance. They needed your failure, your confusion, or at least your perceived stagnation, to continually validate their highly manicured, incredibly fragile illusion of success. Their entire existence was a reactive performance based entirely on your willingness to play small. The tragedy of their existence, and the core reason for their current unhinged behavior, is that their light is entirely conditional. It is a counterfeit glow that only appears when they have successfully forced the entire room into darkness. They do not know how to exist in a space with another fully realized, brilliantly shining human being without feeling an agonizing, existential sense of obliteration. Therefore, they did not just prefer your dumb act. They absolutely required it for their psychological homeostasis. Without your smallness to contrast against, their supposed greatness is immediately exposed as the cheap, hollow imitation it truly is. Contrast this with your authentic alignment. You do not need anyone to fail in order for you to succeed. You do not need anyone to sound foolish in order for you to feel intelligent. Your genius is an intrinsic property of your soul, functioning completely independently of the people around you. Their genius is merely a comparative metric, existing only when they can successfully subjugate someone else. Imagine the absolute mind-boggling arrogance required to look at a divine being, a chosen one carrying the heavy, radiating golden oil of a genuine calling, and genuinely believe that this being was placed on earth merely to function as a footstool for their ego. They took your profound kindness for profound weakness. They took your calculated silence for sheer ignorance and your infinite patience for permanent permission to disrespect you. They grew incredibly, embarrassingly lazy in their manipulation because they believed they had you completely, perfectly figured out. They stopped trying to be clever. They became sloppy in their lies, brazen in their disrespect, and entirely secure in the pathetic delusion that you were too simple to ever connect the dots or challenge their manufactured authority. They built a comfortable, arrogant little kingdom entirely upon the assumption that you would never, ever wake up and remember who you actually are. They became addicted to a ghost, to a phantom version of you that you manufactured out of pity, and the absolute terror currently gripping their nervous system is the dawning, horrifying realization that the inferior person they relied on to anchor their ego never actually existed in the first place. Step 3. Analyze the microscopic data gathering phase hidden beneath your compliance. The massive expanse of time you spent playing the fool was not, as they arrogantly believed, empty space. It was not a void of passive victimization or ignorant submission. It was, in absolute reality, a masterclass in silent, relentless, microscopic data gathering. This is the secret, devastating weapon of the Chosen One that the performative, toxic individuals in your life could never possibly comprehend. While they were busy projecting their massive insecurities outward, running their mouths incessantly, trying desperately to control the narrative and scrambling for cheap validation from anyone who would listen, you were quietly observing, archiving, and analyzing. You possessed the profound, terrifying discipline to sit in the thick tension of their lies and say absolutely nothing. You let them talk. You let them boast. You let them spin their convoluted webs of deceit, watching with quiet, detached amazement as they continuously contradicted themselves, exposed their hidden agendas, and demonstrated the exact pathetic limits of their character. This is the phenomenal, untouchable power of the silent observer. You essentially became a human lie detector, entirely detached from the emotional need to prove them wrong in the immediate moment. Think of it as an ancient, highly skilled chess grandmaster sitting down with a boastful, loud-mouthed novice. The grandmaster does not immediately unleash their most devastating opening move to crush the novice in 3 turns. Instead, they intentionally play a few weak, unassuming pawn exchanges. They deliberately let the novice capture a piece or two. They let the novice feel the intoxicating thrill of a false victory, watching them puff up their chest and gloat. Why? Because in those opening moves, the Grandmaster is mapping out the entire psychological landscape of their opponent. They are seeing exactly how the novice reacts to power, how they overextend themselves in greed, how poorly they anticipate consequences, and how deeply flawed their long-term strategy truly is. This is precisely what you did. You let them play their game while you mapped their entire psychological blueprint. You let them win the petty, meaningless arguments. You let them take the unearned credit for ideas that were actually yours. You let them believe they were successfully manipulating you behind your back, pulling the wool over your eyes. But every single time they did this, you quietly catalogued it in the vast archive of your mind. You noted every backhanded compliment, every subtle attempt at sabotage, every shifting story, and every toxic triangulation. You were not ignoring their behavior. You were systematically building an irrefutable, ironclad dossier on their soul. This silent archiving is fundamentally terrifying to the unaligned because it completely removes their primary, most effective weapon, your emotional reactivity. Toxic people thrive on immediate, chaotic pushback. They want you to argue, to cry, to defend yourself, because in that chaos, they can easily gaslight you, twist your words, and maintain their control over the narrative. But by gathering data in absolute, unshakable silence, by nodding and playing the fool, You completely starved them of the friction they desperately needed to blur the truth. You saw them with a cold, crystalline, almost surgical clarity. You recognized that their arrogance was nothing more than a thin mask for profound terror, that their boastfulness was a desperate cover for deep inadequacy, and that their relentless attempts to diminish you were merely a tragic projection of their own perceived smallness. You gathered so much psychological and spiritual intelligence during this phase that when the time finally came to play the final card, your decision was not based on a fleeting emotional reaction or a temporary bout of anger. It was based on a mountain of absolute, undeniable, empirical evidence. You did not have to guess who they were anymore. You knew them better than they knew themselves, and that silent, microscopic knowledge became the heavy, immovable foundation of your ultimate ascension. Step 4. Recognize the unbearable friction of outgrowing their artificial container. There comes a definitive, absolutely unavoidable moment in the timeline of every single chosen one when the internal spiritual pressure simply becomes too massive to maintain the charade. The universe, the creator, and your own rapidly expanding consciousness literally force you to stop shrinking. You can only fold a supernova into a matchbox for so long before the cardboard begins to ignite. This is the phase of unbearable friction. The transition does not necessarily begin with a loud announcement or a dramatic theatrical confrontation. The shift is deeply internal, but to the toxic individuals who rely on your subjugation, it hits like a sudden, catastrophic seismic event. You simply stop engaging in the old, exhausting dynamic. The transformation is found in the micro-expressions, the slight, unyielding adjustments in your posture, and the sudden, terrifying clarity in your eye contact. You stop playing the character they wrote for you, and the psychological whiplash they experience is nothing short of spectacular. When they tell one of their usual degrading jokes at your expense, the kind you used to absorb with a nervous, accommodating chuckle to keep the peace, you simply look at them with a blank, cold, entirely unamused stare. You let the dead air hang in the room, forcing them to sit in the suffocating awkwardness of their own disrespect. When they attempt to spin a manipulative, highly edited narrative to make themselves look like the victim, instead of rushing to explain yourself or defend your position, you simply say, "Okay," and walk away. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-apologizing for taking up space. You permanently revoke their access to the remote control of your emotional state. The microscopic panic that ensues within the imitator is a fascinating, almost clinical psychological phenomenon to observe. The subconscious alarm bells begin to ring violently in their minds, signaling the collapse of their entire hierarchical structure. It is the exact horrifying sensation a controlling puppeteer feels when they look down and realize the strings have been abruptly cut, yet the puppet is suddenly standing up, turning around and staring them dead in the eye with a consciousness of its own. Their entire reality begins to violently, uncontrollably shift. At first, their fragile ego will try to convince them that you are just having a bad day, that you are tired, or that you are temporarily moody. They will attempt to aggressively poke and prod you with the old, reliable tools of manipulation. They will send the probing, passive-aggressive text messages. They will heavily apply the guilt trips. They will attempt to manufacture a sudden crisis to force you back into your designated role as the accommodating savior or the easily confused victim. But when those buttons, the exact buttons they have pressed thousands of times before with perfect, predictable success, suddenly yield absolutely no response, the sheer, unadulterated panic sets in. The machine they thought they controlled has been permanently unplugged. They are not worried about your well-being. They do not care if you are hurting, healing, or evolving. They are exclusively mourning the sudden, inexplicable loss of their control over your narrative. The absolute goofy nature of their transparent attempts to regain dominance becomes painfully, hilariously obvious. They might try to provoke a massive fight just to get a pulse, just to prove they can still make you angry. Because to them, your anger is still a form of connection. It still means they matter enough to affect you. But when you offer them nothing but a cold, detached, fiercely grounded neutrality, it completely shatters their mirror. They are forced to look at their own hands and realize they are holding nothing but broken strings and empty air. They begin to scramble, their behavior becoming increasingly erratic, irrational, and completely unhinged. They will complain loudly to others about your sudden change in attitude, trying to paint you as the villain. But beneath the frantic, deafening noise of their collapsing ego, they know the terrifying truth. They know that the person they thought was a fool was actually a sleeping giant, and the giant has just stood up. Step 5. Execute the silent, devastating withdrawal of your energetic subsidy. The greatest, most tragic misconception about playing the final card is the ego's belief that it requires a cinematic, highly dramatic confrontation. The unhealed ego wants to believe that ultimate victory looks like a screaming match in the rain, where you finally list every single wrong they ever committed against you, where you brilliantly, flawlessly articulate their deepest flaws, and where they ultimately break down in tears, realizing your worth and begging for your forgiveness. But true spiritual power, the profound, unshakable alignment of the Chosen One, does not require an audience, and it certainly does not require a monologue. The most devastating, absolute, soul-crushing unmasking you can ever execute is done without speaking a single word. You play the final card not through an explosion of righteous anger, but through a total, unyielding, permanent evaporation of your presence. You simply vanish from their energetic radar. You simply withdraw your spiritual, emotional, and physical currency from their highly toxic economy. You pack up your light, your attention, your deep empathy, and your staggering genius, and you quietly close the door behind you, locking it from the outside. To understand why this is so completely devastating to the imitator, you must realize that toxic, highly performative people view every single interaction as a transaction. They are constantly, desperately trading in the currency of reaction. When you argue with them, you are paying them. When you defend yourself, you are paying them. Even when you cry and tell them exactly how much they hurt you, you are paying them with the incredibly valuable knowledge that they possess the power to deeply affect your internal state. By completely removing your words, by flatly refusing to explain your departure or justify your boundaries, you are bankrupting them instantly and permanently. You are severing the supply chain of their narcissistic supply. You are starving a raging, chaotic fire of its necessary oxygen rather than exhausting yourself trying to blow it out. Absolute silence is the most terrifying sound in the universe to someone who desperately relies on your emotional reactivity to prove they exist. When you execute the unmasking silently, you leave them entirely, agonizingly alone with the monstrous reality of their own behavior. You completely deny them the opportunity to gaslight your final words. You utterly deny them the closure of a final argument that they can later twist, edit, and spin to their flying monkeys. This silent execution is the ultimate, undeniable demonstration of your unmasked genius. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the dumb act is permanently, irrevocably over. You are no longer willing to lower your divine frequency to engage in a messy mud wrestling match with a pig who actively enjoys the dirt. You simply step out of the pit and leave them to wallow alone. You realize with profound clarity that your energy is a sacred, divine resource, an incredibly potent life force that was never, ever meant to be siphoned off by broken people who absolutely refuse to heal themselves. The final card is the establishment of the supreme boundary. It is the absolute, uncompromising realization that you owe them absolutely nothing, no explanation, no transition period, no final chance to get it right. You simply look at the game board, realize the rules were deeply rigged from the very beginning, and instead of trying to calculate a better move, you stand up, flip the board, and walk away from the table entirely. The heavy, ringing silence you leave behind becomes a massive, suffocating mirror that they cannot look away from. They are forced to sit in the cold, echoing ruins of their own toxicity, agonizing over how the person they thought was so hopelessly naive managed to completely, flawlessly outmaneuver them with absolute, breathtaking grace. Step 6. Witness the catastrophic psychological meltdown and frantic mimicry. When the final card is successfully played, when your silent, energetic withdrawal is absolute and your genius is no longer hidden beneath the camouflage, a bizarre, deeply pathetic, and highly predictable phenomenon always occurs. When the imitator realizes with sudden, horrifying clarity that they can no longer control you by making you feel small, they will attempt a desperate, frantic, entirely unhinged pivot. They will try to control the narrative by suddenly becoming a counterfeit version of you. This is the stage of frantic mimicry, and it is one of the most transparent, undeniable indicators of a catastrophic ego collapse, because they possess absolutely no original internal light, and because they have permanently lost access to the warmth of yours. They will try to steal the aesthetic of your ascension. They will attempt to pirate your entire spiritual blueprint. You will watch in a strange mixture of pity, amusement, and astonishment as they suddenly begin to adopt your highly specific vocabulary, your unique phrasing, your niche interests, and your profound spiritual rhetoric. If you start a new business or launch a creative project, they will suddenly launch a poorly conceived, incredibly cheap imitation. If you begin speaking openly about healing, trauma, and establishing boundaries, they will suddenly become a loud, highly performative advocate for cutting out toxic people, entirely, hilariously oblivious to the supreme, glaring irony of their words. This frantic mimicry is essentially a desperate attempt to catch lightning in a plastic cup. It is the psychological equivalent of a toddler putting on an oversized adult suit, constantly tripping over the pant legs, and furiously demanding to be treated as the CEO of the company. It is a profoundly goofy, deeply embarrassing spectacle to observe. They genuinely believe that by painstakingly copying the external, mechanical actions of your life, they can somehow magically manufacture the internal, divine anointing that actually produces your results. But spiritual alignment cannot be pirated. You cannot copy and paste the frequency of the divine. Their performance is highly rehearsed, deeply calculated, and aggressively marketed, but it always inevitably rings hollow because it completely lacks the heavy, undeniable resonance of actual truth. They possess the borrowed vocabulary, but not the acquired vibration. They perform the empty rituals of success or spirituality, but they completely bypass the agonizing, lonely, grueling time in the dark where true, unshakable authority is actually forged. They want the public glory of the chosen one without ever having to endure the crushing, isolating pressure of the crushing process. They are attempting to paint over the deep structural rust of their decaying character with a cheap coat of stolen paint. Watching this exact scenario play out is often intensely cringe-inducing. It is incredibly goofy to witness someone trying to desperately replicate a light they never truly understood, a light they actively, maliciously tried to extinguish when they actually had the chance. They will post the deeply inspirational quotes, they will meticulously curate the perfect images, and they will loudly, constantly broadcast their supposed growth and peace to anyone who will listen. But the fundamental, echoing emptiness inside them remains entirely untouched. They are a hollow, fading echo desperately trying to compete with a booming original voice. You observe this frantic performance not with anger, but with a profound, entirely detached understanding of their tragic condition. You realize that their entire existence is still, ultimately, a reaction to yours. Even in your complete absence, you are still the primary force dictating their behavior. They are so entirely consumed by the massive shadow of your rapidly ascending genius that they have completely lost whatever fragile, fragmented identity they originally possessed. Step 7. Solidify your ascension into the untouchable altitude of absolute alignment. The ultimate step, the final, glorious reality of the chosen one who has successfully dropped the act and played the final card, is the permanent solidification of your ascension into a state of untouchable, absolute alignment. This is your permanent residence in a higher spiritual dimension, a designated space where the heavy, gravity-bound, exhausting drama of toxic imitators simply cannot reach you. You have successfully broken through the atmospheric drag of their relentless insecurities. You are exactly like a powerful satellite that has violently, triumphantly shaken off the gravitational pull of a dying, toxic planet and entered the silent, frictionless, majestic expanse of deep orbit. In this elevated state, you no longer shrink for anyone's comfort, ever again. You have permanently broken orbit, and the view from this altitude is absolutely spectacular. You no longer edit your brilliance, suppress your intuition, or water down your truth to accommodate the fragile, unhealed egos of those who refuse to do their own shadow work. You fully, deeply embrace the absolute, terrifying, beautiful totality of your genius without a single drop of apology, without a single lingering caveat, and without a single shadow of fear. You step fully and completely into the heavy, radiating golden armor of your divine calling. Solidifying this ascension means fundamentally recognizing that playing the fool was merely a temporary survival mechanism for a past version of you that simply no longer exists. You have entirely outgrown the necessity of camouflage. You realize now with crystal clarity that your immense blinding light was never actually the problem. Their stubborn, malicious refusal to heal their own darkness was the problem. You are no longer responsible for the shadows that your light naturally exposes. You completely stop taking responsibility for the emotional triggers of other people. If your authentic, brilliant, unapologetic existence causes someone else to feel insecure, you simply allow them to experience that insecurity. It is not your job to manage their emotional reactions to your altitude. You understand that true, unshakable peace does not come from being universally understood by everyone. It comes from being fundamentally, profoundly okay with being misunderstood by people who are deeply committed to misunderstanding you. Their opinions, their frantic gossip, their desperate attempts to smear your name as they watch you rise, all of it becomes nothing more than the faint, highly irrelevant static of a radio station you tuned out hundreds of miles ago. You are an eagle that has finally broken through the glass ceiling of the chicken coop, soaring into the limitless sky, entirely unconcerned with the frantic clucking of those still pecking at the dirt below. This is the ultimate, undeniable victory of the Chosen One. The final card was never, ever about destroying them. It was entirely about unconditionally rescuing yourself. It is the profound realization that you do not need to fight the darkness. You simply need to turn on the light, and the darkness automatically, inevitably destroys itself. You walk with a new, quiet, terrifying authority. You effortlessly attract new, highly aligned individuals who do not require you to be small in order for them to be comfortable. You operate in a frequency of rapid, effortless manifestation because your massive energy is no longer being drained by the parasitic attachments of the past. You look back at the exhausting performance, the years of hiding your genius with a dumb act, and you feel a deep, abiding gratitude for the brutal lessons it taught you. It gave you the eyes to see, the patience to observe, and the absolute wisdom to know exactly when to walk away. You have survived the grueling, hidden curriculum of the spiritual wilderness, and you have emerged as the undisputed master of your own reality. Let us zoom out and look at the absolute, magnificent big picture of what has just occurred in your life. The relentless attacks you have faced, the bone-deep exhaustion, the weird, goofy behaviors of the people desperately trying to mimic or bring you down. None of it was ever truly about your personality, your job, or your relationships. The real target, the absolute bullseye of this spiritual warfare, has always been your alignment. The enemy wanted to keep you completely out of alignment by forcing you to play small, by forcing you to engage in petty, meaningless battles, and by keeping you trapped in an endless cycle of defending your own right to exist. But you fundamentally broke the cycle. You gathered the data, you saw the absolute truth, and you executed the ultimate devastating pivot. You secured your alignment, and the enemy completely lost its grip. Remember this forever, chosen one. You do not ever need to seek revenge against those who tried to suppress your genius. Your continuous, unapologetic, explosive growth is the absolute final verdict. The universe has already ruled entirely in your favor. The people who tried to keep you at the bottom now have to live the rest of their pathetic lives entirely with themselves, constantly reminded of the profound, towering genius they completely failed to extinguish. That is a punishment far worse than anything you could ever inflict. You are entering a season of unprecedented open doors, rapid acceleration, and undeniable, overwhelming divine favor. The heavy lifting is over. The camouflage is burned. The final card has been successfully played, and you have won. If this deeply analytical message resonated with the core truth in your spirit today, I need you to subscribe to the channel right now. Hit that like button to permanently lock in this frequency. Drop a comment below with the exact step or point that hit you the hardest. And share this video with another chosen one who urgently needs to know they are not crazy for the attacks they are enduring. Stay chosen, stay blessed.